In an open letter, the Socio-Economic Rights and Accountability Project SERAP has called on President Bola Tinubu to restrain Nigeria's 36 governors and the FCT Minister Nyesom Wike from undermining judicial independence by gifting cars and houses to judges. SERAP argues that such gifts compromise judicial impartiality and threaten the constitutional balance of powers. The letter, signed by SERAP Deputy Director Kolawole Oluwadare, urges Tinubu to engage Attorney General Lateef Fagbemi to challenge these practices in court. SERAP stresses the need for improved judicial funding to ensure independence and avoid undue executive influence. The organization warns of potential legal action if the government does not address this issue within 7 days, underscoring the importance of safeguarding judicial integrity and maintaining public confidence in the rule of law. Well, to explore this further, I'm being joined by legal practitioner and public affairs analyst Tohwo Oseruvwoja. Thank you so much for being here all the way from the United Kingdom. Without further ado, let's go straight into it. How do gifts from executive branch to judges, such as cars, houses specifically, impact judicial independence and the public's perception of the judiciary?
Good morning, and thank you for having me here. Well, there is a popular saying that the gift of man maketh way for him. You are there. If someone decides to be giving you something, to some extent, we are all human. It affects our emotions, and at the same time affect our decision around that particular person. And it's worrisome when you look at it, when it's coming from one arm of the government to another arm of the government, which believe to be a conservative, who are held to be a conservative pattern, different from the liberal pattern of life. If you look at the reverse code of conduct for judicial officers, you discover that, to my personal opinion, and in my view, I think that is absolutely wrong. And I also think that calling on the president is creating dictatorship, because that means we are resting the whole of an institution in the hand of one person. What I believe and what I think that the SERAP ought to have done is either, since the Nigerian Bar Association, who is the watchdog of the Temple of Justice, is asleep, what I believe SERAP ought to do is not to call on the president, because the president is different and distinct from the judicial arm of government. Is for them to go straight to court and invoke the provision of the Constitution, because I see no reason for such gifts coming, or for such projects be executed by the executive arm and handed over to the judiciary.
Anyway, what are the potential legal and constitutional challenges that SERAP's requests might encounter if it proceeds to court?
There's no constitutional restriction as to SERAP we are because the law states it clear. This is public interest litigation. I'll tell you for free that if you look at the provision of the Constitution, if you look at the third schedule of the Constitution, section 20 talks about the powers. Section 20 of the third schedule of the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, 1999, as amended, talks about the power of the National Judicial Council. Then if you look at section 21 of the third schedule of the Constitution, talks about the powers of the Judicial Council. And if you look at under paragraph E of that section 21, says that the council has the power to collect money, distribute the money, and also execute capital expenditure and recurrent expenditure of the judiciary. And when you look at that particular provision of the law, when you talk about judicial officers, if you look at section 6 of the Constitution, you describe that judicial officers are officers of judges of court of record, superior record. So if you see what the law is saying and what is happening now, you discover that it is actually in breach of the Constitution. Then when you come down to the state, the National Judicial Council also have power by virtue of section 21, so paragraph H of the third schedule, to also do same. So now the question is, if that money has been allocated to the judiciary, why will minister of the FCT or any other person be giving out building houses for judges, buying cars for them, when those things ought to be under the capital expenditure of the National Judicial Council. So SERAP has no legal hiccup if they go to court to challenge our proceedings. And I believe that if we have independent judiciary, if the judiciary is independent, those officers or people involved in such kind of activities ought to be sanctioned. It's never heard of. I've never heard of it. And I think this is one of the warning Honorable Justice Nikki Toby of the Supreme Court warned earlier, though it's late, but I think he foresaw what is going on. And when he told judges to identify that there is a professional distinction between a judge and politicians, and they should be careful not to fall into that distinction, because when you collect gifts for someone, you find it difficult to give judgment against that particular person.
Well said. But how feasible is SERAP's recommendation for increased funding for the judiciary, and what would this mean for judicial autonomy in Nigeria? Recently, we do note that the federal government had reviewed the salary cap, especially for the judiciary. Can you shed more light on what this means, especially looking at the fact that we're talking about this current situation now?
Well, during the time of Buhari, they've given, particularly the federal courts, they've given them judicial autonomy, financial and every other thing, the autonomy financially. And also with the increase of salary scale, you could still see the outcome of judgment coming up. Because some of us were worried that, well, then when I was in Kano, most of our complaints were on the lower court, the Court of Inferior Record, which is the magistrate court. And one of the excuses that was given is that because their pay were low. But surprisingly now, the moment their salary were increased, that is where we now begin to see questionable or something, orders and conflicting orders coming from court of coordinate jurisdiction. So you'll be asking yourself what is going on. So you also realize that it's not about the salary increment, but it's about the person behind the marks of the judges. So is one thing is for them to give them the needed salary. The other thing is the integrity and the process appointing judges or appointing people who become judges that sit over the affairs or that represent God on earth here. So it's the process altogether. And if you also look at it, I think a justice raised a concern when he said that the process of appointing judges has been adjusted. So increasing salary is one thing, but what about the process? Because if I decide to influence your appointment as a judge and a case is brought before you against me, what will become of that? That is a question you should be asking. So I may decide to even be paying you $1 million, or the public, because it's not me, but the public may decide to be paying you $1 million. But when you know that the process has been compromised for you to become who you are not supposed to be, you will tend to favor the person who made such a process. So SERAP has a lot to do, and I believe I want to commend them because this ought to be the job of the Nigerian Bar Association. But since one is asleep, then SERAP on their own taking it up, they should follow it to the latter. Let's see, because one thing is the world is watching. The other communities are watching to see the outcome of every actions when it comes to the credibility of our judicial officers.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tohwo, for joining us all the way from the United Kingdom. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us here on News Now.
You're welcome.